Hey everyone, after my very pessimistic video about Yoimiya's current state in the game for those who are considering Yoimiya, today I'm going to be making a video on those who do want to go for Yoimiya and what you need to prepare for when her banner comes in a few days. So let's first talk about her weapon selection. Now Yoimiya has a lot of bows that she can use, but to not overcomplicate things, basically just use Rust. If you have Rust, especially with refinements, just use this bow because it's her best was-our option, and at R5 is actually almost as good as Thundering Pulse. So if you don't want to risk your Primo Gems trying to get Thundering Pulse and get Summer Shaper instead, or worse, off banner, just go ahead and use Rust. Echo Simulacra is second best to Thundering Pulse, and Amos Bow is almost as decent as Rust, but because of the passive where it deals more damage the further you are, and Yoimiya's playstyle is she would rather be closer to enemies, so Rust is the more consistent weapon to use for her rather than Amos Bow. So, but if you don't have Rust, you can go ahead and use the Crackle Bow Hamayumi. The refinements makes it almost as good as Rust, and if you value your billets for some reason, you can use Slingshot also. It has very high crit rate and the passive that's almost the same as Rust. The low base attack is quite worrying, but you can just use Bennett and Noblesse Oblige set to compensate the low base attack on Slingshot. Next is to consider which set to put on Yoimiya. There's only 3 options for her relief for if you're really that desperate, which is the Shimenawa's Reminiscence set, the Crimson Witch of Flame set, the Echoes of Offering set, and if you're really desperate, the Retracing Bullet set. But I don't recommend that last one because the domain itself is a pain to farm, and it's a really niche domain to farm anyway, unless you're a Geo main that's not for Ito. So the set I recommend to farm the most is obviously going to be the Shimenawa's Reminiscence set, because not only this set is directly for Yoimiya, and it also contains the emblem set which you can use for your support as well. So you can get one set for Xingqiu, for your Beidou, for your Xiangling, for the sub DPS, and also for Yunjin if you're going for a 2-piece energy and 2-piece defense set. Now don't worry if you can't get the 4-piece set straight away. The substat is more important than the 4-piece set itself. You can make do with it just using the 2-piece set, and the other 2-piece set either from the Gladiators set, from farming her Awakening materials and any other allies, and also the Wandering Troop set which gives EM, which can improve her reactions somewhat until you can get a proper 4-piece set, all with good substats. Moving on to her Constellations, to me personally, I don't think it's worth pulling for a Constellation. Not that it's not good. I mean, like, all of her Constellation basically improves her DPS, but considering pulling for dupes is basically spending $100 each, it's not really worth the price, unlike someone like Raiden Shogun, who C2 literally makes her ignore some defense of the enemies. So yeah, like, this is just straight up 20% attack. This is just 20% bonus power damage. So it's not really worth pulling for the cons if you're tight on Primos. As for talents, obviously you should crown her normal attack. If you're a true Yoimiya, you should triple crown her in general. But her skill isn't really worth crowning because after level 6, I believe, the scaling for blazing arrow damage isn't really that much far in between. And as for her burst, yeah, also not the same. You could just leave these two at level 6 or level 8, but only triple count her if you really like Yoimiya like I do, and you just want her to deal the most damage as much as possible. Now before I tell you the team cops themselves, I want to show you the supports that you can use with Yoimiya, starting with the shielders. So obviously Zhongli is going to be one of her best shielders because he has 100% uptime for his shield, either via the 12-second cooldown with the 20-second duration, or if you have C2, you can refresh the shield using its elemental burst. If you don't have Zhongli, you can use C4 Yanfei. Her shield is pretty decent. It uses 45% of her HP when you use her limit burst. The good thing about your Yanfei also because she's Pyro, so you can activate the Pyro Resonance with Yoimiya. And also you can put in Prototype Amber for heals against some chambers that has the wolf boss and also the wolf mobs, that decrease HP even if you're shielded, or even the Frilling Tails Dragon Book that gives some attack buff to Yoimiya. But because that's considered Constellation, the more on-demand shielders you can use is Diona, which is really good to use at C0. And if you have her at C6, she can also contribute 200 elemental mastery to Yoimiya so that she can do reactions for more damage. Toma is also a good Pyro shielder since he's also Pyro, so that's Pyro Resonance. But C0 can be a bit difficult to use because both of his cooldowns from skill and burst are 15-second cooldown, and both shields only last for 8 seconds. And his elemental burst costs 80 energy, so you might need a lot of battery for him when you have C0. But yeah, if you don't have either 3 of these, Toma could be a good substitute. And if you have his Constellation, that makes him even better. Now for Yoimiya's Hydro support, so it will be Yelan on Xingqiu. So you can use both of these if you're Yoimiya, or one of them if you have to use the other one for your Futao or for some other freeze comps that you have to use one Hydro unit for. So Yelan is a more offensive version for Xingqiu. So she deals more damage than Xingqiu, but Xingqiu provides more utility than Yelan. At C6, I think they're both almost equal. Perhaps Xingqiu's utility may make him better than Yelan in that regard, because if you don't know, Xingqiu skill actually heals when it breaks, and it also gives some damage reduction based on his Hydro damage. So along with the Hydro supports, you want to use Electro supports with them so that you can trigger either just Overload or an Electro Vape. So official at C6 is amazing with Yoimiya. Since Yoimiya's attack is pretty fast, so official C6 can deal more damage with Yoimiya, and she can be a pretty good battery for your support as well. Beidou is pretty good, almost as good as official in single target situations, but she's more towards AoE situations because her elemental burst can jump between enemies to give Yoimiya the AoE that she's really lack. And one thing to note that if you don't prefer to use shielders, you can use both Xingqiu and Beidou on the same team. Xingqiu with his damage reduction, and Beidou also has a shield in her C2 when you cast her burst, and while in her burst she actually gets interruption resist. So coupled with Xingqiu's quote-unquote barrier, where you can heal, and with the damage reduction, you can essentially forego a shielder and using these two together. Next are support that will contribute to Yoimiya's overall pressure damage. So we got Yunjin, Bennett, where is he? Kazuha, and Jin. So Yunjin is actually one of the best supports for Yoimiya in terms of her personal damage. When comparing to Bennett at C6 with Aquila Forvonia, Yunjin actually beats Bennett when it comes to buffing Yoimiya's damage. So you can keep in mind that if you're building your team and you require Bennett for the other side, that's okay when Yunjin can fill in the gap where Bennett left. Kazuha is self-explanatory. He will use the VV set on him, and his elemental mastery will give bonus power damage to Yoimiya and also help her against some fights in the abyss that has multiple enemies. And Jin specifically at C2, she's actually pretty good for Yoimiya because she gives attack speed at C2 when she releases energy. So does Yunjin at C6 when she uses her burst. So you can also use Jin with the team comp with Bennett. No, sorry, not Bennett. With Xingqiu and Beidou if you're fighting against a really hard-hitting enemies and require some emergency heals. Jin can contribute heals and also the attack speed buff if you have her C2. Some of the more unorthodox supports that you can use with Yoimiya is Ganyu, Hayato, Rain Shogun, and Rosaria. You can use cryo units like Ganyu and Rosaria with Diona to help Yoimiya proc more melt reactions, especially when you're up against some chamber floors that has a lot of hydro units like the floor 9 of the Abyss. Meanwhile, Ayato's Elemental Burst is basically a hydro version of Ganyu's Burst, with the addition that it also buffs up normal attack damage, which will help Yoimiya a lot. Additionally, Ayato can also serve as a second carry for when Yoimiya's time on field is up, since she has an 8-second downtime after she's done with her rotation. Riding Shogun is a pretty good Electro applier and also battery for Yoimiya supports, and she also serves as a pseudo second carry for Yoimiya also, with her elemental burst in the Tachi form when Yoimiya's rotation ends. Now that we're done going through all the units that can be a good support for Yoimiya or a second carry for Yoimiya, we can now talk about the actual team comps that you can use in the Spiral Abyss. So let's first start off in a situation where you're just fighting a couple chambers where it has the typical boss like the PMA and the Magutenki. So for that, you can just use a standard Vaporize Comp with Xingqiu and Yelan, and a Shielder with Zhongli, Yanfei, Toma, or Diola. So if you don't have Yelan, like I said, you can replace her with Official for a more overweight kind of team. But when you're fighting enemies and bosses that has innate elements to them, like the Slimes, Cryo Cubes, Hydro Cube, and Eternal Manifestation, it's best to go for a more Mono-Pyro Comp. So one of the main examples would be with Bennett and Kazuha and a Shielder. So when you apply Bennett Circle, it will constantly apply Pyro to the team, and Kazuha will always prioritize Pyro for his swirl for the Viridescent Binary Shred, and also the Pyro damage bonus conversion from his EM. Aside from Kazuha, you can also use Jean, whose burst also does the same thing, almost. She will apply Anemo to the team constantly, and with Bennett applying Pyro to the team constantly, she'll actually swirl herself. And if you have the Viridescent Binary set, it will actually apply the Pyro Shred even when she's not on the field. So that's a thing to remember by. And if you have C2, like I said, she can give some bonus attack speed to Yoimiya to make her attack faster. Next is a situation if you want to bring Yoimiya against groups of enemies. Even though I don't actually recommend you to use Yoimiya against these kinds of enemies, which is more suited towards single target fights and bosses. If you choose to do so, you can use a animal grouper, so Kazuha, Venti, or Sucrose. I'm just going to use Sucrose for now. Beidou for her really good AoE, and either Xingqiu for the for overweight, or you can use Official for more Electro application, and also a battery for Beidou. Sucrose is situational if you're fighting against like a lot of group mobs that can be pullable, like the Hilichurls in the first half of floor 12, or you can just use Xingqiu along with these two Electro when fighting against some enemies that can't be grouped up, like the Samurai from Inazuma in the second half of floor 12, for instance. Now you might be wondering why I haven't put Yunjin in any of the team comps so far, even though I said that Yunjin is better than Bennett when it comes to buffing Yoimiya's personal damage, and the reason being is because every chamber in the Abyss is entirely situational. There may be boss chambers that Yoimiya is effective against in the Abyss floors, but there are chambers like before or even after the boss chambers where Yunjin doesn't contribute to the team as a whole compared to the other supports that I've shown so far. For instance, if you're using Yoimiya in a half where the first chamber is going to be a bunch of mobs, the second chamber is the boss, and the third chamber is also a bunch of mobs. So it's much more beneficial for you to bring supports to deal with groups of enemies that also can deal with single target bosses like Kazuha, Fisher, and Beidou, rather than Yunjin, whose only purpose is to buff Yoimiya's personal damage, which won't contribute to the team as a whole. So for the times that you can bring Yunjin to support Yoimiya's personal damage is when the non-boss chambers in the floor on the half that you bring Yoimiya in contains very few enemies. For example, some floors, I remember some days ago that had like 1 or 2 Geo Bishops. Since there's only 2 enemies, Yoimiya can deal with that very quickly, one at a time. But when it comes to this current base in floor 12 where there's a bunch of Hilichers and Katui, you might as well bring in better supports to deal with groups of enemies rather than Yunjin. So if you want to build a Yoimiya team around Yunjin, you can go ahead and do it for a Mono-Pyro team or a Vape team. So Yoimiya, for Vape team, Yoimiya, Xingqiu, you can put in Yunjin and Zhongli. So this is the best Vape team with Yunjin because you have Zhongli for the Geo Resonance, which gives some bonus damage to normal attacks, and Xingqiu is gonna over here and Vape. And he can also provide as a battery somewhat for Yunjin also, but it's best if you build Yunjin with lots of ER so that she can keep up her burst against single target bosses where they usually drops very little energy. For a Mono-Pyro team with Yunjin, you can replace Xingqiu with either Kazuha, Jin, C2, and Sucrose. For the Veridescent Better Shred, Sucrose can use the the Trailing Tails books to give attack buff to Yoimiya, and you can replace Zhongli. You can keep on Zhongli, or you can change him to either Bennett. If Bennett is used for the IT team, you can replace him with Yanfei for Pyro Resonance and also for shields. So that essentially covers most of the team comps that can be used with Yoimiya, depending on the situation of the Abyss. Out of this video, I'll be posting some showcases of the team comps that was shown here, so that you guys can get an idea on how to play Yoimiya and her team comps. Especially with the Shimunawa's Luminescence set, which can be anti-synergistic with her kit, especially if you have Thundering Pulse. But with the videos I showed, I can show you how Yoimiya can still use her burst while also use the Shimunawa Reminiscence to get the 50% bonus damage for her normal damage. So stay tuned for that. And like I said, if you like this video and if you find it somewhat helpful, especially after my my previous video, please give a like and subscribe so that I know that these kind of videos is worth making, so I can create more guides to hopefully help more Yoimiya mains and other characters that I feel like doing.